Where Kevin left off, if there is any American whose life and life's work deserves to be honored by laying in honor in the U.S. Capitol, it's Billy Graham. So it's an honor for us here in the Capitol to receive Reverend Graham's casket and to greet his family. So that's something we're very proud to do and reflective of. First off, I want to say all of us have been deeply troubled by this Parkland shooting. This is a time for asking tough questions. How could this have happened? What can we do to make our schools safer in the future? We're going to be looking at the system failures that occurred here. We're going to be talking about what changes are needed. As you know, the House has already taken action to improve our background check system. We clearly believe that there is a gap in our background check system that needs to be filled. We also put in place sweeping mental health reform, but those reforms still have a ways to go to be implemented. These are the kinds of things we're going to be discussing with our members, with the Senate, and with the President. I had the fortune of being able to go meet with people in Broward County, first responders, local elected leaders, just to hear firsthand about what had happened in the ensuing chaos and the breakdowns that occurred. So this is something that we're very, very, very troubled by, and we are going to be having the kind of conversations we need to have with our fellow members to do what we can do to try and make sure something like this doesn't happen again. And again, there are a lot of system failures that we need to look at here. On a more positive note, I also got to spend time with local businesses in Wisconsin last week, learning about how the tax reform law is making them better and making them much more competitive. It's really something. These small businesses told me that tax reform is enabling them to increase capital investments in their people and their equipment and their training. I've talked to many business leaders, small businesses, who are now confident that they can go take a risk and expand employees, expand operations, giving bonuses, giving raises, adding to the benefits. This is what we are seeing all over the country. Wages for hardworking Americans are increasing and paychecks are getting bigger. And this is all thanks to tax reform. And people are actually noticing it. A new survey last week revealed that confidence among small business owners has hit a record high driven by tax reform. A New York Times poll showed that the majority of Americans now support tax reform. 51% of Americans now approve of the new tax reform law. It's up from 37% in November, because I think you saw a lot of the rhetoric that was flying around here in November is not meeting the reality that people are actually seeing in their own paychecks. This is heartening. The American people's confidence in our economy is coming back, and rightly so. Tax reform is growing our economy. It is creating opportunities, and it's helping hardworking Americans the most. Questions?
When do you think we could see a vote in the House on banning bump stocks?
Well, as you know, the House passed our bill that gives the ATF direction to go deal with this issue. Also fixing the background checks. We're waiting to see what the Senate can do, and we'll find out what the Senate can do, and then we'll address that then. Rachel.
Prepared if the Senate passes that and decouples it from concealed carry reciprocity? Are you prepared to put that on the floor?
Yeah, we obviously think the Senate should take our whole bill, but if the Senate cannot do that, then we'll discuss and cross that bridge when we get to it. Yeah.
How did you all decide to invite Reverend Graham's body to lie in honor in the Capitol? And just how big of an honor is that, and who is involved in that?
Well, Patrick called me early that morning. Patrick McHenry, who represents the district that the Graham family lives in. I quickly turned around and called Mitch McConnell, and we got together and decided this is obviously something we should do. And we turned that decision around. The president called me as well that morning. So between Mitch, the president, myself, and Patrick McHenry, we made that decision very quickly. Alan.
Do you rule out the House considering an assault weapons ban? Do you rule out expanded background checks like the mentioned Toomey bill that would close the gun show loophole? Do you support the program funding that would fund arming teachers? And is there any way in which you support going beyond any of the half dozen or so proposals?
Okay, that's like 6 questions in one there, Alan. 4. Okay, let me see if I can get. First of all, I'm not going to micromanage this. Second of all, I'm not exactly sure what Pat and Joe are doing in their bill, so I can't really specifically comment on that. That's a Senate bill. But we do know that there are gaps in the background check system that need to be plugged. We passed a bill to do that, and we think that should get done clearly. Let me just say this on we shouldn't be banning guns for law-abiding citizens. We should be focusing on making sure that citizens who should not get guns in the first place don't get those guns. And that is why we see a big breakdown in the system here. In this particular case, there were a lot of breakdowns. from local law enforcement to the FBI getting tips that they didn't follow up on to, school resource officers who are trained to protect kids in these schools and who didn't do that. And that, to me, is probably the most stunning one of them all. So there's a lot that we have to look at, but what we want to do is protect people's rights while making sure that people who should not get guns do not get those guns. Chad. Oh, teachers? Look, we have Sheriff Rutledge has a bill that we're looking at as well that addresses this issue. He's a sheriff from Jacksonville, as you may know, and we're looking at the Rutledge bill. But that is really a question for local government, local school boards, local states. As a parent myself and as a citizen, I think it's a good idea. But as Speaker of the House, I think we need to respect federalism and respect local jurisdictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. And so you talk about what
You blurted out.
Mr. Scalise talked about meeting with the Parkland students yesterday, and you talked about the legislative process here. What would you view, and I'd like to hear from Mr. Scalise as well, as a defeat on not being able to address some of these concerns from Parkland after they've come up here and, as you say, engaged in the legislative process?
Well, I think it's good that they're coming up engaging in the legislative process. We should encourage that, especially with our youth. So this is, again, there are a lot of questions that need answers, and there are a lot of members who are putting their heads together to figure out where the common ground is. What we want to do is find common ground to make a difference. You want to add to that, James?
Yeah, I mean, as people are contemplating new laws, I think the most important thing we can look at is what about all the laws that are already on the books that were not enforced, that were not properly implemented? I think what angers me the most is when I see breakdowns with law enforcement. The FBI had this guy's name on a silver platter, not just innuendo, and there were a lot of students in that school that said, we think he's going to be a school shooter. He himself said he wanted to be a professional school shooter, and it was posted under his name and ultimately turned over to the FBI. And somewhere along the way in the FBI's chain of command, they let it go. I think we ought to ask those tough questions and hold people accountable. There are really good people at the FBI, but clearly there are people at the FBI that chose to let this go, and I think we ought to know about this. And then at the end of the day, when you look at local law enforcement, and the sheriff's been very outspoken in a lot of ways, but I think what angered me the most is that there was a sheriff's deputy trained and armed at the school, assigned to protect the school, and he hid out instead of protecting those students and confronting the shooter. I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for law enforcement confronting the shooter in my case. And it's really disappointing that ultimately somebody didn't go into that school that was there and armed to protect those kids.
Casey.
You're meeting with these Parkland students. You have a daughter who's that age. Can you look at them and say that you are doing enough to prevent this from happening?
First of all, there was a colossal breakdown in the system
But they're asking you.
locally. So there was a colossal breakdown, and we need to get to the bottom of this, how these breakdowns occurred. From what Steve just mentioned, to the armed officer who was in the school at that time, to the FBI who failed to follow up on a glaring tip that this young man wanted to shoot up a school. So that's pretty profound. Then we also know that there are problems in the system with background checks where people slip through the cracks. Those are things, we already passed a bill to fix that. We want to finish by getting final law on that thing. So, of course, we want to listen to these kids, but we also want to make sure that we protect people's due process rights and legal constitutional rights while making sure that people who should not get guns don't get them. This kid was clearly one of those people.
Last question, to follow up on Casey's question. Do you think that's enough? And how do you answer this? Because when they say they want you to do something.
I realize that, but the question is enough. I think this speaks to bigger questions of our culture. What are we teaching our kids? Look at the violence in our culture. Look at what they're getting as far as a culture that's providing them. There's bigger questions here than a narrow law. What about law enforcement? What about school resource officers? What about the FBI? What about background checks? Those are all things that we have to get lots of answers to. At the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, we also have to ask ourselves about the kind of culture that's creating these kinds of people. And then, do we have the kind of mental health laws that we need in the books? Again, we passed overhaul of the entire mental health system. The question is, are we making sure that that overhaul is doing what it's supposed to be doing to making sure that people who are like this do not get those kinds of guns? That's where we should focus our problem to be solved, which is the people who shouldn't get guns without trying to take away a citizen's rights. Thank you.